All right. Well, again, Marco, thanks for taking time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Marco Baratto. I'm from Italy, and I'm a senior comper at this point.
Nice. And I was curious too, like, did you always expect to be in some kind of creative career growing up, or is it something you fell into?
I think so. I think I always had that hunch, really, but things kind of materialized, I think, around when I was 18, 19, between high school and the beginning of uni, where I had the opportunity to, mess around with video and DV tape at the time, and, cumbersome cameras and Panasonics that wouldn't work with certain DV tapes and others. We're talking about SD, of course.
That's cool. I was curious for you, when you first did get into visual effects, like how did you get your first big break?
So out of uni, out of 3 years of university in the UK, from the second and third year, I discovered VFX and comp in particular, thanks to one of my lecturers at the time, Julian Luttrell, who had been a compositor, I think in the 90s and early 2000s, and then left for teaching. So he introduced me to what the practice was, and it was After Effects at the time, and I was like, that was my first moment. And he saw me, do well in After Effects, and he said, well, if you like that, then try this, and that was Fusion. At the time. So I got out of uni in 2009, and a few months later, I found Taylor James in London, East End of London. They were building a Fusion team at the time.
That's so rare. I've only seen one studio be like, we're going all out. We're buying like all the hardware, doing a whole Fusion suite.
Absolutely, and at the time it was the battle. They were still battling it out, but Shake was still around. Then I mean, tail end of it, I guess, but
before Apple killed it.
yeah, and that's what happened. I was using Fusion and with Taylor James for nearly 3 years, till became apparent that Nuke was the way forward, and the time it took me to make that shift and rebuild a showreel that would prove that shift was it.
I'm always curious about this because even right now there's a few compositors I'm working with that they're kind of coming from After Effects and trying to make that transition. Like for me, I really got into After Effects but then moved to Fusion 3 and then 4 and then Shake. I think from there it was Nuke because I couldn't go back to Fusion after that. Yeah, I was kind of curious for you, like transitioning from more of a linear workflow to a nodal based one. Like what was that like to transition?
At the beginning, the first times, I still remember the first few times I opened up the node graph, and in Fusion we would flick things onto the viewers, which is something that died hard eventually. But yeah, it was definitely a traumatic transition. But honestly, if you put yourself in it, it's like learning a language, or learning a tool. It's just a matter of if you full immerse yourself for 3 weeks. I think that's the switch happens, and I think there's no way back. Literally after 2 or 3 weeks of full immersion, you see the power of it quite blatantly, and it's really hard to go back at that point.
I'm kind of curious too, like do you find having a personal project versus just kind of learning, I'm going to learn it all and tinker around, like do you find like having a specific project in mind helps you kind of pick it up and fall into the traps that you otherwise might avoid?
Of course, I think it helps, the mix of tutorials and, applying your own ideas or using the tool to realize your own ideas. Of course, there is always a tutorial moment where you have to know where to click. But once that snaps, it's super useful to generate some content. Fusion at the time wasn't as powerful as Nuke is today by any means, but you could still do a lot. And if you know the limitations of your tool and your limitations of how your knowledge of the tool, it becomes easier to know what's in scope. And you can always reduce scope or up the scope the more you know the tool. But it's good to have, finding the self-contained idea that you can realize you can make with your own hands at home after work without staying up too late. That's half the fun, actually, I find, of exploring the tool itself, which is something I still do to the day. Just if I feel on the work side creatively quite dry, then it's usually the time I pick up the camera, go out and shoot a few nondescript videos and try and turn them on their heads.
Nice, I like it. And I was curious too, like you mentioned before about going to college. I'm always intrigued by that, just people's different opinions and experiences with that. So for you going to college and then trying to find like the thing that you want to do, like what was that whole experience like for you?
Well, going into college, and I only did a 3 years BSc, Bachelor of Science in New Media Production Technology. So it was as broad as it could be. One of our modules was about DVD technology. I'm just saying that, but it kind of fell on my lap. The interest in generating, or manipulating video just fell on me, and I'm happy it did. So there was no intention going into college to do that necessarily. I mean, I liked shooting video, I liked editing video together, but I had no idea about post, the VFX side of post. What college ended up being for me was, let's say the 2 years that I did spend, 2 out of 3 years that I did do VFX in college, gave me the opportunity, gave me the time to learn it. Basically, it was just buying the time that it takes to learn the tool that then you will use to do the things that you like. And I think if you have an instinct to create some content or to manipulate video or images, I think if you have that instinct, then a showreel will come out regardless. But college gives you the opportunity gave me the opportunity not to have to, work while I was in college. I had the opportunity to not work during college, and so that cleared up time for me to learn the tool. Yeah, that was paramount for me, just taking the time to learn the tool. And then, my final year project was a fully Fusion 5 green screen video. It was a whole thing. I don't know if you remember the HP hand commercials. It was a mid shot, neck to belly button, and people, explaining things with their hands, and stuff would come out, and yeah, that was very inspiring to me at the time.
Cool. Obviously, I want to talk about your background in visual effects, but just because we're on the topic, I was curious to, like, obviously, coming to the US, going through a work visa, all that kind of fun experience. I always find that that's one area that most people don't really know too much about. And for you, having a bachelor in science, did that help the process a little bit? Or I was just kind of curious, like, what your experience was like.
How it figured into me coming to the United States. Mm-hmm. So I can't speak to that. I'm sure it has some weight in the visa application process, but honestly, there was no questions asked about that. They were more interested in knowing where I was coming from professionally. It didn't make much of a difference. And I do think about the background of VFX artists a lot, and how it would have been if it'd been different or how different would it have been if I had been a fine artist as opposed to a technology direction. And there are different VFX artists, and I think that's the beauty of our industry as well. It accommodates very different approaches, and it's problem solving. And I've seen people solve visual problems with a couple, soft mats and a stroke of color or contrast, and I've seen people solve shots extremely technically.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Is you've got creative, and I feel this is more comp, more than 3D especially, but like having the creative artists who, again, just kind of dabbling, putting stuff together, and technically it mightn't be the most glamorous comp to open up and look at, but at the same time, like, they get the job done. It's more they're painting with nodes, I guess, versus someone who is looking at, there should be one color correct node. In fact, don't use color correct, it should be gain. And just in general, people who kind of get more into the math and efficiency of it. And if you wanted to break that down a little bit and kind of elaborate just on the types of compositors out there.
It is predisposition. It's artistic versus technical predispositions and interests. I think interest is the key word, honestly. What interests you, without saying what turns you on, but I think it's a matter of that, creatively, because it is creation. Whether you're a coder or a fine artist or a painter, you're still, building something, you're still trying to solve a problem, I think. But yes, there are different types of compos, and I've seen people solve problems in 10 minutes where it was a compositional problem, framing and, weight of the features in the frame. But I have seen, often those are not the people that will be able to pull a perfect key. And they don't overlap necessarily. The more they overlap, the better, of course. But that's people. People are different. People have different levels of patience, and patience for different things. And I think that's a key thing. And it also depends on the projects that you're on. Very much depends on the nature of what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And are you trying to streamline something for 150 shots, or are you trying to make, or is it like a 50 shot thing where everything needs to be a jewel? You know, it's interesting. I find it fascinating all of my colleagues are different between each other, you know, between me and them, and I've learned something from everyone, I would say.
Yeah, it's so critical. And that's something too I'm kind of really fascinated by. Like, are you working on site at a studio, or are you working remotely at the moment?
I am working remotely at the moment. Actually, since bar a couple of exceptions of studios that insist on working on site in New York, which I appreciate. The rest has been remote, from home, from Brooklyn, from Manhattan, basically.
Yeah, one of the guys, like an effects guy I was just working with, he's a buddy of mine out in Brooklyn, so I think he's kind of sold now on working remotely. Despite obviously, you know, a lot of studios around in New York, it's kind of more convenient.
Absolutely, yeah. Who is this person, if I may ask?
Oh, Caius Wong. He used to we worked at Eyeball and Tronic and a bunch of other places on around New York, PsyOp. Obviously, is still,
right.
But yeah, again, like whenever I go out to New York, got a few friends out there, but it's just kind of fun to actually get to work with a few of them now that everyone's a lot more open to remote work.
I mean, it radically changed the structure of our industry. I mean, I've heard it called, I mean, COVID, the whole experience and working from home was the big leveler to a certain degree for visual effects. And it encouraged, you know, smaller studios coming up and encouraged people to take the time they need and ultimately do their work better, as opposed to, you know, the days of, you know, being in the VFX suite or the project suite until 4 a.m. I feel might be gone. You can still do 4 a.m. at home, but it's a different kind of 4 a.m., you know, and it's a different set of rules and set of tolerances. And
when you are working late, it's like, all right, well, I can kick off a render and then I can go monitor my renders from the couch or something, rather than
absolutely,
you know, being at work. And yeah, I've seen so many relationships destroyed by having to just work consistent crazy hours where you can't maintain a social life. So
look, I worked, you know, full time before COVID, before 2021. I was full time in New York doing commercials, leading commercials. I was at the Mill at the time, and the Mill is not the only example. It's not uncommon for relationships to suffer or have suffered a lot because of this. You could probably argue that people suffer also by being in close proximity at home. So during lockdown, it was tough.
Good point too.
I think it is something that we all needed, at least in our industry, or creative people. You know, not, you know, being at home, being in your comfort zone, and still having the opportunity to apply your art as a profession and your craft, and you know, taking your time. I think it was a creative renaissance for a lot of people. Definitely for me in the first year. Then things changed. You know, it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, things changed a lot during COVID.
I bet. How has that broadened options for you? Like, obviously, being in New York, you've got a lot of opportunity to work at a lot of different studios there, but now are you able to take on contracts from all over the world, not just necessarily in the US or Brooklyn, Manhattan necessarily?
I am, yeah, and it's been great. I've loved the experience, and I've loved what doors it has opened, or the way of working it has opened, you know, where location is only a problem because of time zones, but that is also a conversation that can be had, and tolerances to be explored, and wishes to be met or not, you know, and it's been great. It's been great to work for Europe more. And, you know, on the topic, I am planning on moving back to Italy, to my hometown actually, this year, and continue doing what I do for the US and, you know, the rest of the world from there, you know, and being closer to family and friends. And yeah, it's a great thing that a lot of people are exploring right now, I feel.
Yeah, so if you don't mind me asking, so that's because now you've got the opportunity to be able to work anywhere, so why pay $5,000 for a 1,200 square foot apartment or whatever?
It describes itself as a reality, you know, and New York isn't getting any cheaper. And, you know, and there's a time for everything. You know, I was in my early 30s when I came to New York, and I'm in my late 30s now. I'm 36. And I spent my 20s in London, and I spent, you know, 6 years now, nearly 6 years in New York. And I feel right now it's matured, you know, the penny has kind of dropped for me. I'm just like, okay, this is next.
I think that's good too. It's pretty healthy. Earlier, you're excited to do new things, but it's also a chance to kind of do some damage and make an impact on your career, and then from there start to actually prioritize life over work rather than
Absolutely.
yeah.
Priorities change, I never thought, a lot of the time your priorities change without you really noticing it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you find yourself questioning the way you do things from one day to the next.
Yeah.
And you realize that your priorities have changed. And that's part of, a career, honestly. It's part of development, personal and professional development of anyone, I guess.
Either way, I think that's really great that you're able to prioritize, getting to go home and not have to be necessarily physically in the same location.
I'm glad you think so.
If you are working remote, like what's that like in terms of being able to share ideas? I mean, it's for me, I'm the head of CG as well as a VFX soup at a studio here in Portland, and the head of compositing is right next to me. I'm surrounded by compositors, and it's great because we're always just nerding out and, oh, did you know we got this new node over here, or check this out. It's so much easier when you're in earshot of someone. What's that like remotely? Because you can't really just jump on Zoom and be like, hey, check out this really cool thing really quick. It's, let me send you the link and the password and set up a thing. Like there's obviously barriers in place. So
there are barriers in place. You can do that. That's something to keep in mind. You can do that. There are ways of being social and prioritizing that and giving importance to the social aspect. Mm-hmm. But it's a different story. Being in a room with someone is chemically different. And the way you learn things is different. And we're just using different parts of our brain by socializing the way we are right now. It's not, and communicating ideas and technique. It's not ideal, I would say, and also especially and I do think of people joining the industry in these mm-hmm. different times from when I joined them, completely different times, in every aspect probably. It's not ideal. I don't think it's not as efficient as it is being in the same room with people.
Yeah, it's more organic, whereas now it would need to be more intentional of, hey, let's do a call and do that.
That's for sure. Logistically, it speaks for itself. I think also on a mental health level, on how we learn things and what we're used to communicate and how we used to communicate, I think it's a completely different game.
I was curious, you worked on a lot of amazing projects. In terms of feature films, Guardians of the Galaxy was one of them. What was that experience like? Like, how did you first get involved in that? And what was some of the challenges that you had to work through?
I was coming out of my second job in the industry. I think I joined MPC London Film in 2014 for Guardians. And I was not a Marvel, I was never a Marvel,
Drink the Kool-Aid.
I never drank the Kool-Aid, I barely knew the characters, just to, I knew what Marvel was, but I was never on the comic books. And that was great, I really wanted to work in film, and Guardians was my first of not many films in general in my career. I have not done many, but it was an incredible experience. And actually that's where I learned, that's where I met Giacomo Mineo, who is currently a VFX soup at DNEG, who souped Oppenheimer internally. And yeah, between him and a lot of the film senior compers that I was surrounded by, absolute 10 out of 10s, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about pipeline in a big shop, and the attention to detail that film requires, that no one is ready for. You're not ready for until they kind of try to extract tears from you. And it was a very steep learning experience and a super valuable one. And I think it's as valuable as being in a tiniest boutique studio and having to do a bit of everything, or as value as being in the driver's seat or a lead in a place like the Mill, and having to speak to clients yourself and convince them of one way of one approach as opposed to another one. They're all very integral parts to the process itself, creative and not. Guardians was a great opportunity, and they seemed happy with my work pretty early on, and I was very happy. I was given a couple look dev opportunities close to my start there. That was. I think I remember it fondly, and I tied relationships with a lot of compers and CG artists, and during those times it was very much like being in the trenches, as we refer to them. But
that's great.
Invaluable experience.
What were the sequences that you were mostly on?
I still remember the the acronyms of them. Just that's how
You always
tattooed.
do. 07, DM210, and every other
Oh,
shotgun that haunts you for the rest of your life.
yeah. I actually worked on the opening sequence where Star-Lord dances around in the rain and uses his scanner, his blue laser scanner, which I developed with another few artists on there, and that was in comp mostly. There was the final battle sequence, with I think it was 50 layers total, between tracers and enemy ships, friendly ships, big ships, DMP, FX number 1, FX number 2, FX number 3, up to 8. That was deep comp. That was my first introduction to deep compositing, and fascinating. And there were some amazing tools being developed by actually Marian Mavrovich at the time was the head of comp, and amazing person, and I learned a lot from him. And he was developing a lot of interesting tools and auto updaters when CG would come in, and the first time I ever saw auto updates and scan the script to see what's coming in and create holdout mats automatically between, that was great. That was a great thing to see, and I learned tidiness. Script tidiness, and it's probably one of the most important things that I try to pass down to whoever is I'm working with.
I'm just kind of curious, like, are there any set rules that you follow these days or tend to share with other people in terms of workflow and keeping things tight?
I think so. I think it's the same ones that I learned at NPC at the time, and the clue is in the way the nodes are built, top down, left to right. Each background to foreground. I don't like hiding inputs. I don't like postage stamps, but that's just me. I know a lot of people that do love it, and it has its moments. It has its place, and just for streamlining, if you have a lot of shots, and but you have to comp thinking someone else is going to pick up the script.
I think that alone is such a valuable lesson of accountability. Like, if someone were to open this, would they laugh or be impressed at, like, wow, this person keeps a clean, tidy workflow?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I value that to today. And I make a point of, I take some time, but it's something that interests me. I enjoy the process of maybe untangling a look dev moment, but you end up being tidy even when you're throwing stuff at the node graph and trying things out. You end up being tidy while you do that itself. And if I do inherit a messy script from someone, honestly, I kind of enjoy going in and untangling it and shaping it the way I want. And things become clear. Things become very clear, and what was messy isn't anymore, and you see what the logic behind it was. And I love that side of seeing how people think, or because it's an immediate thing. With enough experience, you open up a script and it speaks to you immediately.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've never heard anyone say that, but it is so true, because you're right. Like, there's times you might look at something and it is a mess, but after a while you're like, okay, I get what they were thinking. I feel like 3D, like CG, isn't quite the same because everything's so embedded. The good thing about a node graph is that it's all there in front of you. It's just, it might be very convoluted, but it tells a lot about them.
And that's what sets it aside from going back to layer-based comping. It's not all there staring at you.
Exactly, yeah.
If you're unlucky, 30, 40 pre-comps nested into each other. So
I don't even want to think about it. But yeah, it's so true. Again, like comping in deep, what was that experience like? It's kind of fascinating that deep workflow has been around for, God, I'm going to say 15 years. It might be that long, but actually, yeah, about 15 years. Because even in 2009, we're contemplating using that quite a lot, and Weta obviously is really big on it, but still to this day, like, there isn't that many studios, maybe 5 to 10% that actually rely on it. What was that like for you, and do you still follow that workflow? Or, and again, obviously it's going to be more based on what the studio relies on.
It's literally that. I think it's such a time and memory consuming technology.
It's like, we don't have the disk space.
We don't have the disk space for 250 megabyte of frame. It's not viable. And having the double, having a normal read nodes, a normal pipe, and then deep pipeline than to then, deep to image out. It's heavier. It's just heavier, but it allows you, but it's the only way also to do certain things. So if you have to do those things, you have to do that. And usually if you have to do those certain things, you're probably working on massive films and massive projects that require that, especially with effects and volume. And deep actually, in my once every few months I work on a little personal project. Maybe I find a piece of video that I really like and work on it, and fully in Nuke, maybe Photoshop a couple times, but fully in Nuke. And you can definitely use deep within Nuke for your own projects, for correct holdouts and faking volume and depth in your Atmos cards. There's a couple clever expressions that you can use to actually get pretty convincing volume without simulating, without using particles even, or maybe use particles to distribute your cards, and then dimensionalize them with deep, and they will intersect any geo that you might bring in or generate properly. It's not as straightforward as maybe receiving deep renders from a huge CG department, but it's an amazing technology. You can do a lot with it.
Yeah, honestly, I've never worked on a project with deep workflow, but even the last project I did, where seriously, like, this could, we need to find a shot just to try it out, because I grew up with like 8 megabyte Targas, and now we're dealing with like 200 megabyte, like 30 embedded channels, and yeah, it's getting crazy. So introducing now like a giant point cloud per image is just, yeah, it can become pretty heavy.
That's the thing. To use deep, you're not necessarily drawing the cloud. You can do that, and it's going to be the most beautiful point cloud you'll ever see. But you don't have to bring it into the 3D space. You can just use it for holdout, for correct holding out. You can use it smartly from the scanline renderer. You can bring out a deep, do a couple of things in deep, and then deep to image, and that's that. And leave it and pre-comp it and forget about it. It can be used smartly, and there's been projects where, in studios I've worked for, where it would have been extremely beneficial, but it was just prohibitive cost-wise, and time and space-wise is prohibitive.
It's been on my bucket list forever. Like I said, it's just I think at Blur Studio back in the day, we're looking at using it for Halo, and then we realized that like the network would just choke, and then more recently it's just time's sake, but I'm very curious to build out a pipeline around it eventually.
I think the first time I saw it in action was, no, not in the studio because I wasn't there, but I think District 9 was one of the first projects I saw them using the 3D space in Nuke very heavily and doing holdouts with deep. I might be mistaken, maybe it was just the 3D space and cards, and it really leaned onto that. And
cool. Yeah, I know like Chris Harvey was the VFX supervisor for that, for Image Engine, and then he went for Blomkamp, but I'll have to pick his brain sometime about it, because yeah, I'm always fascinated by that. I was gonna pick your brain about Oppenheimer. Obviously, that just came out. It's a huge film. I was curious what your experience was like on that show, or that movie, I should say.
It was different from anything I've done before, ever, I think. Just the process itself, and Christopher Nolan and his approach to VFX, the no CGI approach, of course, made things. It was in comp, so we were only in comp, basically. We were only in comp and trying to do as much as we could with the least amount of intervention. And that was the first time I was briefed that way, and it was a real team sandbox effort to find solutions to the problems that he was putting in front of us. It was unique. I haven't had an experience like that before.
I feel like a lot of times like VFX gets the bad rap because it's when people start to spot VFX in the show, that's when they start becoming an expert on it. But again, like, compositing was an analog thing, and doing it digitally makes sense. Same thing with DI, like Oh Brother Where Art Thou, I think, was the first movie to go completely digital, but it doesn't mean that suddenly that was a VFX film. It just meant that, hey, like, we can create continuity across an entire film a lot easier.
It's a tool that needs to be used. That can be used. It doesn't need to be used. It can be used. It's not always used at its best potential, and but it has to be directed. It's just a tool that you can use to make something better. Now, there's something to be said about a completely optic and analog approach. And I think Blade Runner 1, of course, is the reason, the most inspiring thing I saw back in the day that really got me onto the process, and I think Nolan would love and does love that movie itself, because there is no CGI and everything, it was done optically, and it was all miniatures and good lighting and clever photography, and we love that as compers. We love that. We don't want unnecessary CG either. No one does. Or unnecessary VFX or post-production if you want, but it's a tool that you can use to your advantage. If you don't like the results that technology brings, you don't have to use it, or you could use it differently from the way it's being used that you don't like, so it's not a good or bad inherently. I think the AI moment that we're living right now, AI as a basic technology, is a little trickier. And it's not as direct as saying it's a tool, because it's such a base technology. But essentially, that is the point. It's a tool that you can use. Whether you should use it or not, that's a different story. And if you don't have to, if you want to, you can, and you can make it invisible. There are movies that do have CGI, computer generated, like pixels generated by software, not photographic. And you wouldn't tell. You probably couldn't tell. So
it's funny, movies like Revenant is a great one. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, massive scene. It's like, wow, they did that in one take, let alone CGI bears, and I'll just say that as one example. But like watching that film, I had kind of that idea in my head of, let's say, my father-in-law being like, "See, that's a real movie. There's no CGI," and I'm just like waiting for the credits to be 5 minutes of, but it's like the art department or anything else. It's people creating elements that go into a film.
It's not easy. Good VFX, good CGI is not easy. And anyone who thinks it is, and anyone that uses it to solve the problems that they maybe created in lack of pre-production, or because of how things go on set, and because, just being on set, a shoot day manifests itself. There's very little steering control that you have once you're on it, I think. But it's a tool that you can use intensively. You can use it. It can be your friend. It's a technology. It's not good or bad in itself. What we're experiencing now, I see more and more. I think superhero burnout, or superhero burnouts, and I think we're desensitized a lot. And we expect cameras to go like this, and we're just going to shut off at one point. How many of those can you watch? Maybe younger generations prefer that to older generations usually, and that's fine. Spectacle versus being grounded and being, relatable, and nothing screams realism more than a plausible camera, and very few cameras are plausible in the VFX shots in Marvel movies, and I think because they're trying to do a different thing, so it's a tool that you can direct, that you need to direct, you have to direct. It's not easy. And I'm sure, Cameron in Avatar, it takes 10 years for him to make movies like that, because he spends 7 years of those writing and going through the art department's concept art and saying yes and no. And because that's the legwork. And then CGI can be, you can like the movie or not. And that's not what we're talking about. The CGI can be spectacular because it has depth and thought and very careful direction, and but that's what you're doing. Then if you're a person like Nolan, or like other directors like him who do not rely on CG and make a point of doing that, that's a choice they make. If there has been any demonization of CG recently, I think it's misplaced. I think it's pointing at the wrong thing. It's not a race. At who uses less CG. It's a race as to who uses it better, who is able to direct something that they can't see, and without seeing the final thing, without seeing everything they don't want, and until they see the one that they want. So it's not easy. It's not an easy thing. It's not supposed to be easy. And you notice when a client, it could be a film or a TV or a commercials client, they think it's easy. You notice by the speech patterns, and you notice by the urgency, or the idea that some seem to have, that they're quick changes. And you can argue both sides. If something is done properly, it's not easy. but it should come. But the process could be, you know, the art process, the artistic process, the taste involved, and how do you communicate with words and reference what you want. That is the difficult side. It's not the technological side, it's just the directorial side. That's the hard bit.
Curious, like in regards to Oppenheimer, for you, what was that experience like? What were some of the contributions or some of the challenges that you were running into?
I think the main challenge was to how many ways can you arrange two shot elements to convey a story or to convey an idea?
Making it A-B, enough stuff.
How many ways is the real question. How many ways until you find one that is the right one? Which one really conveys the idea the director had in mind, you know? And you don't have an arsenal of 600 people doing heavy CG and 5 departments. You only have plates, extremely high res plates, but plates nonetheless, you know. But and the answer, it takes hundreds of versions.
Yeah,
that's the challenge, and I never had that before. I never had the opportunity to actually really concentrate on what am I looking at? What is this? How do you? That was a very interesting thing, you know. It's just shut out the noise. These are the 2 things that you can use, or the 3 things that you can use. It was amazing. I really appreciated that. I enjoyed it. You know, obviously retrospectively things feel, you know, potentially more positive than while you're in them late at night, trying to solve problems over and over again. But that's the nature of the beast, and we like that. And I was warned after being asked to join. I was warned that this is not conventional. This is not going to be your usual process, so don't take it to heart. I think is what they told me, and I knew it was going to be. It was a sandbox experiment. It was how do we convey the idea with 2 things, you know? So, and you're trying everything. You're using the tool, turning it inside out, and trying to get the best out of it that the director will like, you know.
What were some of the lessons you learned from that whole experience?
I think the value of communication and efficient communication is something that I take away from every project, in good or bad. You know, lack of or excellent communication or less excellent communication. It was a new experience for me, but you know, I already had 10 years experience behind me, so the process is the same ultimately. We're still trying to solve problems. But you know, bigger projects, like tiny projects, face the same bottleneck or the same lowest common denominator, which is efficient versus inefficient communication of an idea, or raising a flag properly, or you know, or directing something that you don't like into something that you do like, within yourself even. You know, I don't like this. Why don't I like it? It's difficult to do 100 versions in.
In regards to Oppenheimer, like, what was the team? Like, how big was the team that you were working with?
The London team, I think it must have been 20 max, 20 or 30 max. 20 in London.
Team.
Tops, yeah, for the London team. The India team had many more. We did not communicate much between the 2 teams. I think there was a real separation of tasks. As controversial as this whole topic is about being credited and giving credit where credit is due, which is everywhere, honestly. If you know, sure. It's a complex. I think it's not a complex idea, but it's a complex industry, I think, and the politics of it are complex, and the inner workings of end titles or end credits are still a mystery to me. And whose responsibility is what? Time is money, I'm sure, and lines cost money, but you know, yeah. But it was a very tight. I can speak for my team, my direct London team. I think we were tasked with most of the look development, so the more explicit effects that we, you know, put on screen, or storytelling effects. I think we worked on in London, and I was surrounded by some of the best compos I've ever seen.
That's great. That's really cool. I'm curious for you, like what's next on the agenda? You working on anything interesting or got any big plans? You mentioned moving back to Italy, which I think is again really exciting.
Between that and working simultaneously, and paying the high bills of New York and that, and paying for the move back, and it's a busy time for me, and just trying to figure out what the next step is. I think I need to move back and take it from there. I'll probably work more from Europe for Europe. Some amazing people that I know have spread around Europe from the mill, New York, and I have already worked with, Bacon X being one of these studios who I love very much in Copenhagen. Yeah, I'm planning on working on for Italian studios more, which will be a first for me actually. This is ironically, yeah, and counting on keeping my clients here and working for the UK again a bit more. Yeah, so that's the idea. I'd like to simplify things a little bit and get a bit more of my Italian culture to come back.
Yeah, anytime I go back to Australia now, I tend to hide my accent over here just because for some reason everyone's fascinated with Australia, so I get asked questions about spiders and sharks and snakes and whether Australia has electricity, random stuff like that. So whenever I go back though, everyone's like, so where in the States are you from? And I'm just like, I'm from here. I just have demolished my accent. So hopefully you don't go through the same.
What happens to me, and I've been told this from my Italian close friends back home, is every time I come back, my regional accent gets stronger and stronger.
Nice.
And I think that might be a subconscious search for roots, which wouldn't surprise me. I think the brain does work like that.
So where can people go to find out more about you?
Well, my LinkedIn usually is my most up to date. My reel hasn't gotten an update in a couple of years now. But yeah, there, or get in touch directly via email. You can find it. My website is listed there. The website is not as up to date and it needs attention, but yeah, LinkedIn is my base camp, I'd say.
Great. Well, I'll make sure to link to everything in the show notes. But again, Marco, it's been really great to catch up.
Thanks, Allan. This was great.